to the first hearing of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry into the appointment of Mr. John Barilaro as Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to the Americas. The inquiry is examining the circumstances leading up to the appointment, including the processes and probity and integrity measures that were undertaken. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands in which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today, we will be hearing from one witness, Ms. Amy Brown, who is the Secretary of the Department of Enterprise, Investment and Trade and the Chief Executive Officer of Investment New South Wales. I thank Ms. Brown for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it's important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, you can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. And if you wish to hand up documents, you should do so through the committee staff. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into the microphone. For those with hearing difficulties who are present in the room today, please note that the room is fitted with induction loops compatible with hearing aid systems that have telecoil receivers. Finally, could everybody please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? I now welcome our witness. Ms. Brown, could you please state your full name and position title and swear either an oath or an affirmation, please?
Certainly. Amy Louise Brown, CEO of Investment New South Wales and Secretary of Department of Enterprise, Investment and Trade. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Now, do you have a short opening statement to make?
I do have an opening statement to make. It's 3 minutes. Is that acceptable?
That's absolutely fine.
And I've brought a spare copy for Hansard.
Thank you.
Can we have that down, sorry? Can we table that for me?
Yeah, that could be tabled down for copies to be circulated.
Thank you for having me here today as a witness. I welcome the opportunity to outline the facts involved in the appointment of Mr. John Barilaro and address the questions that the committee may have. I first became a New South Wales public servant in 2013. I'm committed to the public sector core values of integrity, trust, service and accountability. That includes the Westminster principle of an apolitical and impartial public service. This principle is recognised in the Government Sector Employment Act and Regulations and has been reaffirmed by the government in its response to the Pearce Review dated August 2021, supporting the position that ministers should not have additional involvement in the appointment of public service senior executives. The appointment of Mr. John Barilaro is a public service appointment. Before you raise the many questions you have on process, I would like to say that the appointment process for the Agent General and Senior Trade and Investment Commissioners has evolved imperfectly. Early advice contemplated by New South Wales Treasury when the program was first launched in 2019 recommended that the Agent General and STICs, as they've become known, be appointed as public servants under the GSC Act rather than statutory officers appointed by a minister. However, The approval process New South Wales Treasury developed and Investment New South Wales later inherited did not reflect how those appointments should be made under those laws and regulations. This has since been rectified and was corrected well before Mr Barilaro applied for the role. Impacts of COVID in 2020, machinery of government changes in March 2021, establishing Investment New South Wales, followed by statewide lockdowns, meant that it took until August 2021 for a clear position to be settled on how sticks should be appointed. The question of which arrangements are most suitable to the appointment of sticks has been persistent. It's not for me to comment on which system is preferred, that is statutory roles versus public service roles. That's a policy matter for government. But there does seem to be a lot of misunderstanding, including amongst some staff of Investment New South Wales, on how these appointments are made, and to the extent I can clarify those matters, I'm happy to do so today. Since August 2021, no formal approval of any minister or the Premier has been sought prior to the appointment of sticks, including Stick Americas. I'm familiar with and have led multiple merit-based recruitment processes under the GSC Act, and the recruitment process for Stick Americas was consistent with those. The Independent Public Service Commissioner, who was on the recruitment panel with me, can confirm this. As is customary with high-profile external-facing Band 3 senior executive roles, informal opinions of the responsible minister are often sought, and how a candidate presents themselves to the minister is considered. However, final determination rests with me as the employer. In preparing for today, I've taken the time to reflect on the appointment of Mr Barilaro, and I am confident that, as the employer of the role of Stick Americas, I have fulfilled my duties under the GSE Act with respect to this appointment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now we'll commence with questions from the opposition, kicking off with Ms Penny Sharp.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Fairman. Thanks, Ms Brown. Thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome.
Can I just ask you that before you appear here today, have you been in contact with any ministers or their officers in relation to the evidence you're going to give today?
So I've had high-level conversations with my senior cluster minister, Minister Ayres, the Minister for Enterprise, Investment and Trade, more in terms of checking in and support to make sure I was prepared for today, but not as to the content of what will be discussed, no.
Sure. And any other ministers or ministerial officers?
No.
Premier's office.
Not the Premier's office?
Not the Premier's office.
No, the Premier's office. And have you received any texts or emails from any of the any other ministers or officers in relation to today's hearing?
I have not.
Okay, thank you. Ms Brown, it's correct that Mr Barilaro has signed a contract to become the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to go to New York. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And when did he sign that contract?
The contract commenced on the 20th of June. It was approved by me on the 16th of June, so between the 16th of June and the 20th of June is the most accurate I can relay.
And it was announced publicly on the... Yeah.
And Ms Brown, thank you for your appearance as well, Secretary Brown. Just when was Mr Barilaro given an offer prior to him signing the contract, and if so, when?
He was given a verbal offer prior to signing the contract, as is customary. So we commenced formal substantive contract negotiations on the 23rd of May. And so the verbal offer would have been made immediately prior to that.
Great, thank you. And can I just confirm, is the contract for 1 year or for 3 years?
3 years.
And can I confirm that it's a Band 3 appointment?
Yes, it is a Band 3 appointment under the GSA Act.
Is it above that figure?
No, the salary is within the Band 3 determination.
So it's about $487,000, is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
And can you, are there living allowances as well in relation to this appointment?
Yes, a cost of living allowance is provided to take into account the cost differential between living in Sydney and living in New York.
Are you able to tell the committee how much that is?
I would have to take that on notice, although I will note that it is marginal compared to the figure that is being quoted or speculated upon.
Well, what is the figure that's being speculated upon?
I believe that a figure in the order of $100,000 or so has been speculated upon, and it is nowhere near that amount.
Right, but that is the amount that's paid for the London Agent General.
That's exactly right. The
Right.
Agent General is under particular circumstances that are different from the sticks.
Well, the Japanese position, I think you told us that estimates, Mr. Secretary Brown, was circa $70,000 to $80,000. Is it more closely aligned to the Japanese figure, or is it more closely aligned to the London figure?
I don't recall saying that at estimates. I'm sorry, Mr. Mookie.
Well, I'll put it to you now. The Japanese figure is circa 70 to 80. Is it closer to 70 to 80, or is it closer to 112?
I'd have to take that on notice because I've prepared for the Stick Americas line of questioning.
But you can't tell us how much the cost of living allowance is, even though this is
there-
specifically for this position.
For this position,
Yeah.
I would like to take it on notice so that I can be more accurate.
Well,
Yeah.
you're clearly prepared to know that it was less than the figure that's being publicly speculated. Can you
Point of
just-
order. Point of order. The witness has taken the question on notice to provide members with an answer. The witness should be able to continue on.
She has taken the question on notice. No, I assume Ms. Housos was getting to another question.
Yeah, and so my question was, if you have prepared for today, but you're aware that it's significant or it's different to the amount that's publicly being canvassed, do you have an idea? Can you give us a general indication of where that figure is?
Saying that it is significantly less than the number that has been canvassed is the best answer I can give, I'm afraid.
Is the office space for the Commissioner in New York being finalised?
I believe that a lease has been taken out on the office space.
Can you tell us how much that costs?
No, I'll take it on notice.
Where is the office? What's the address? Whereabouts is it?
I'll have to take that on notice.
You previously had suggested it might be within the consulate. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So it is in the. So the address is the consulate.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And when does the lease commence?
I'm uncertain. I don't tend to look after operational matters as to our leasing space and costs and square meterage and things like that. But I can get the team to answer the question for you.
Chair, I'm just going to raise a point of order. It's just in relation to procedural fairness. The jumping around of questioning between three different questioners is making it, I would imagine, very hard for Ms. Brown to be able to
She's
address
doing all right.
the question that's being asked, because another person then starts to ask a question over the top of another one. I'd ask that
Just to the point
one questioner be permitted to ask a question.
Thanks,
Ms.
Mr.
Brown.
Fang. To the point of order, Mr. Mookie.
No one's jumping over each other. We're
Yeah.
waiting for the witnesses. This opposition time. The secretary of a department is capable of answering questions.
Thank you. Ms. Brown is actually answering the questions very capably that are being fired at her by the opposition. So
That's
please
exactly
continue.
what's happening, that they're being fired at her. And I think
Well,
that's
we're able to
appropriate.
ask questions
You are?
in order,
Order,
one at a
order.
time.
But you've got plenty of time today. You don't need
Mr.
to be-
Mr. Fang, through me, and I've ruled. If Ms. Sharp, if you could continue
Thank
questions.
you. If you could get us the obviously the amount of the lease when it commenced, but also the square meterage of that would be very helpful.
Why don't I endeavour to do that before the end of the hearing?
Is there temporary accommodation being set up for Mr. Barilaro in New York?
Not to my knowledge.
Is it permanent accommodation?
No, not to my knowledge. That's a matter for him.
Okay, thank you. Is there a break clause in Mr. Barilaro's contract?
There is a break clause. Yes.
Could you outline the circumstances and the way that operates, please?
It depends on the circumstance upon which he's terminated. For example, each contract in particular has a probation period of 3 months, I believe, and if the arrangement is terminated within that time, then the amount payable is 1 week.
Do you have the contract there with you?
I do not.
Would you be happy to table the contract?
I will take it away and be provided with advice as to what can be tabled today. I know that there's a Standing Order 52 that is due to be returned imminently. Certainly it will be captured within that, so I'm not sure about
If you could
the
come
ability for
back
us to
within-
duplicate, but we'll go as
if
quickly
you
as
could
we
come
can.
back at the end of the hearing on
Yeah.
that question, if you're happy to table today.
We're moving as quickly as we can on this.
Have you discussed with any ministers the terms or the nature with which any termination would take place?
I have not.
Have you discussed it with any of the ministers' officers?
I have not.
Have you sought legal advice in relation to the termination of Mr Barilaro?
Our General Counsel is aware of the terms of the contract, and he would be well placed to advise.
Can I just follow up on that? You said that he's entitled to 1 week if he's terminated within the probationary period. How long is the
Correct.
probationary period?
3 months.
After the 3 months, is he entitled to a payment upon termination for no cause?
I cannot. It depends on the circumstances and the details of the contract, which I will provide
Ms
to you.
Brown, you said that he's been employed under the GCE Act. Section 41 of that Act provides that any public servant, SES member who's terminated for no reason is entitled to 38 weeks settlement. Does that apply to Mr Barilaro?
It does. That is a correct observation in terms of GSC Act contracts more generally. Senior trained investment commissioners are specific contracts that are bespoke to the jurisdiction
Yes,
with
Ms
which they're
Brown, we went
operating.
through this in estimates.
And the 38 weeks tends not to apply to them, no.
We went through this in estimates. I'm asking you, is there a like clause in his contract that entitles him to a payout after the probationary period? First question.
It depends on the circumstances, but there is not a clause akin to the 38-week clause.
Well,
to
what's
which
the
you're
maximum
referring.
he could be paid in the event that he's terminated under any circumstance?
I believe that's I'll take it on notice. That's a complex contractual
Ms.
matter,
Brown,
and
it's
I'm
not
not
that
a contract.
complicated. I'm putting it to you quite directly. It's standard in executive contracts, private sector, public
These are
sector.
not standard contracts,
Ms.
Mr.
Brown,
Mookie.
Secretary Brown.
Point of order,
accept
point of
that.
order, point of order.
A point of order's been
The
taken.
witness has indicated that she will take the question on notice. The witness has indicated she does not have that information here with her. I think the member should move on with his questioning.
She has indicated she will take it on notice. However, I think Mr Mookie is trying to get to a level of depth with that question, and I'd say pursue that in a different manner.
Well, Secretary, we established in estimates that other stick positions have entitlements to payouts in the event that there are terminations made. Now, you've said you've prepared for this hearing, specifically on the stick America's point. It's a really straightforward question. No matter how the circumstances, short of Mr Barilaro being terminated for cause, is he entitled to any payment after the probationary period? And if so, what is it?
So I'm doing my best, Mr Mookie. I haven't had a lot of time and notice for this hearing.
You signed the contract less than a month ago, Mr
having
Chair.
said-
I'm going to raise a point of order now. The witness was clearly trying to provide an answer to Mr Mookie. Mr Mookie continues to talk over her. I've held off raising a point of order to allow
Thank
the
you,
questioning
Mr.
to continue.
Thank you, Mr Fang. I've got the point. I will remind all members that witnesses are. We do need to treat them
Sorry,
with respect,
of course.
please, in terms of the questioning.
Sorry, Secretary, given that you signed this contract 9 days ago, surely you can tell us whether or not you agreed to a clause that entitled Mr Barilaro to a payout in the event that he is terminated for no cause after the probationary period.
I think my answer remains as before. There's no clause akin to the 38-week payment clause that is in general GSC contracts. Mr Mookie, I sign a lot of contracts, including with sticks and various other arrangements within government. I don't know the detail of every single
Ms.
clause,
Brown,
but we can provide it.
I'm listening to this, just a quick one. If there's nothing there akin to 38 weeks in the contract, and he's only going to get 1 week within the 3-month period for non-performance, then isn't it true to say that if he's sacked after 3 months, he gets the balance of his contract paid out? 3 years and 9 months?
I would need to take that on notice because, again,
You
it
should
depends
know
on the
that. You signed the
circumstances.
contract.
It depends on the circumstances. So if we're talking about performance management against KPIs, for example, those grounds would be different to a...
Chair.
What I'm asking you to consider is
Point
that
of order.
the government simply decides to remove him.
I'll just remind all members, please allow the witness to finish the answer before you ask
you.
another question.
I
Proceed,
think
Mr.
it- I think
Corso.
it's entirely-
Thank you, Mr Fang. I do get the point.
Ms Brown, has the probation period commenced? Did it commence when this contract was signed?
Yes, because the contract has commenced and so therefore the period has commenced.
So Mr Barilaro is being paid for the position already?
No, because... sorry, may I correct the record? His contract commenced on the 20th of June. He commences in the role on the 12th of July. So that is when the probation period begins and when he would begin to be paid for the job.
Okay, thanks Ms Brown.
When's he flying to New York?
That is a matter for him.
What's the matter for you too? You're his employer. When's he flying to New York?
Those flights are booked by the individual.
So when do you expect him to be in New York in a position to do his job as his employer?
When he has a visa that will allow him into the country.
And when do you expect that to happen, Secretary Brown?
Usually visas take a couple of months, but again, I cannot predict with accuracy.
Just to be clear, given the various inquiries that are being undertaken into this appointment, there is absolutely nothing stopping John Barilaro from getting on the plane on the 12th of July, presuming he has a visa.
If he got a visa before then.
And you would anticipate he will start then. He'll be in the office space and he will be in accommodation that's subsidised. Is that correct?
Again, our experience is that visas take a lot longer than that, but if by some miracle he has a visa, then
Has the application for a visa been lodged?
that I would have to take that on notice because my operational team deal with that.
Secretary Brown, are you considering terminating Mr Barilaro or suspending his appointment pending the outcome of this inquiry or the review that's been ordered into this appointment?
I have not turned my mind to that yet.
So, given that the department itself or the DPC has ordered an investigation,
Yep.
are you considering suspending his appointment pending the outcome of that investigation?
I have not considered that.
Okay.
So you haven't considered even pausing
Chair.
this appointment?
Point of order.
No. There's
You
no,
haven't-
it's not,
you
there's no
haven't-
point of
No,
order.
there is.
Give it- no.
It is Ms Sharp. Chair?
Yes, he has called a point of order, so I have to hear it.
Yes. Look, I understand we've got a number of participating members from the Labor Party, and I know everyone wants to get on camera today.
It's our time.
You're
Now
Stop now,
you're
you're
wasting
wasting our time.
However, the continual talking over of the witness, the
talking over each
continual...
Yeah, order.
jumping-
I've heard it. I've heard enough, Mr. Fang, and that wasn't talking over. Mr. Graham jumped in when another question was finished, and that question was
Point-
answered.
You just
I've-
answered the point.
I
That
don't
was
think
not.
Ms
There is
Brown
no
needs your
point of order.
assistance.
There is no point of
It's
order.
not that.
Mr.
It's just-
Graham,
it's a-
please
it's about-
continue.
it's
Mr.
about
Fang,
procedural fairness.
Mr. Fang,
Right.
let's continue with the opposition questions. Mr. Graham.
I just simply want to ask that you haven't even turned your mind to pausing this appointment given the significant public controversy over the appointment of Mr Barilaro and the investigation that's ongoing. Is
Given
that
the short
correct?
notice for the hearing today, I have barely had a chance to think about it.
Thank you.
Secretary, Chair, can I table certain documents, please, and have one
Yep.
provided to the
Sure thing.
witness, if it's possible? And copies for others too, but perhaps we can start with the witness. Thank you to the Secretariat as well. As a prelude, Secretary Brown, one of the issues that has now arrived in the public domain, which is around whether or not Investment New South Wales was asked to convert these positions into ministerial appointments. And in the documents that are eventually going to be handed to you, which I'll ask if we can go straight to the witness, please, if it's possible to get them straight away. Thank you. I really appreciate that. If you don't mind, these are documents that your agency produced to the upper house. If you don't mind, please turning to page 44 of the bundle that's been given to you. Down the bottom it says page 44 or 54.
Sorry, can I
Sorry,
just...
some of them are sideways.
One of them is sideways, Ms Brown.
Sorry, can we just wait till we've all got a copy?
We can.
Yep.
Play at home.
But page 44, you can see here, this is an email.
Mrs. 052's been downstairs
This is
since
a-
November, so
this
you
is
could
a
have had
I
it
know,
email.
since
but
then.
you're tabling
This-
them now to the
This
hearing.
is an email
Yep.
which your general
I'm
counsel...
familiar with this email.
Thank you. This is your general counsel transmits on Tuesday, 21 September 2021,
That's right.
which according to your opening statement occurs after there was clarity around the processes.
That's right.
Just going straight down to the bottom here, you can see in the highlighted section, your general counsel, who, out of respect for him, I'm not going to name, just refer to him as his title,
Certainly.
email someone else in your organisation, presumably forwarding a draft of an email that they're sending to, I presume, a Deputy Secretary in DPC. They say here, we are now asked to consider whether there are alternative methods that sticks could be employed. Specifically, we have been asked whether there is an option for ministerial appointments. Did you ask your General Counsel to consider conversion?
So, for clarification, this email was sent to the General Counsel of the Public Service Commission.
Sure.
Okay. Our agency is asked for policy advice on many matters, including the mechanism by which a public service employed role could be converted to something that involved a ministerial appointment. There are two mechanisms by which that could be done. They could be converted.
Secretary Brown, I appreciate that.
I haven't finished my answer.
No, Secretary
Mr.
Brown, you're
Wilkie.
not actually answering my question.
Well,
Secretary
I am,
Brown,
because-
the question
Point of
I
order.
asked you very specifically
Okay,
was
point
a
of
very
order.
Okay, I
Point
know
of
what the
order.
point of order is going to be in terms of allowing the witness to answer a question. We'll just wait and just hear at least for Ms. Brown to complete her
Sure,
sentence, if that's okay,
Secretary.
Mr.
Yeah, that's
Wilkie.
fine.
Mr. Fang.
Just 10
That's
more
what you're gonna
seconds
say?
would be, and
Sure,
I'll
sorry,
be there,
sorry,
I promise.
Secretary.
Thank you. So, in order to convert public service appointments to ministerial appointments, there are two mechanisms. One is to convert them to statutory officers under a particular act, a bespoke act, which would have to be legislated and passed. The other mechanism that was being contemplated was amending the Government Sector Employment Act in specifically Section 10A of the regulations, which talks specifically about trade employees.
Indeed, and look, to be fair, Ms. Brown, you are anticipating some of the questions which I'm just about to ask you. But
Thank
the
you.
question that I did ask you, which you didn't answer, was: did you ask the General Secretary or General Counsel to consider whether there are alternative methods that sticks could be employed? Did you make the request to the General Counsel?
I believe the request was made from a particular minister's office,
Which minister's office?
the Deputy Premier's office.
So Deputy Premier Barilaro got in touch with your General Counsel directly? His office got in touch with him directly?
I don't know the chain of how he was instructed, whether he was called directly or whether my...
Was
you
it
know,
an advisor in Deputy Premier's office, or was it the Deputy Premier himself?
It was the advisor in the Deputy Premier's
So the Deputy
office.
Premier office asks, were you notified of that request prior to it being made to your General Counsel?
I was already aware of the request because I had been asked for my view as well.
Who asked you for your view?
The Deputy Premier's office.
The Deputy Premier's office or the Deputy Premier?
Deputy Premier's office.
And when did they ask you for your view?
I believe it was on or about the 6th of September.
So 2 weeks prior to this request. And was that
Yes,
asked
this was
in
a more
your-
complicated request.
And was that
that's all.
asked in the context of your fortnightly catch-ups with the Deputy Premier?
I met with the Deputy Premier once in the 6 months that I was
Okay.
accountable to
But
him
you
as
were
the
ca-
trading industry.
but you
minister.
were-
Just to be,
And it was by
clear
teams.
there, so in terms of dealing with the Deputy Premier, did you work through Mr Barnes?
No. Mr Barnes is a separate department. I met weekly with an advisor in the Deputy Premier's office, and that was the extent of my instructions.
And
from
in
the
that
Deputy
weekly
Premier.
meeting, was it raised with you?
Yes.
Well, what you asked?
In a meeting around that time, yes.
And what did the Deputy Premier's advisor ask you?
In the first instance, I was asked, what is the mechanism by which senior trade and investment commissioners are employed? And I explained that they were public service employees under the GSC Act. And then I was asked what are other mechanisms by which they could be employed, including ministerial appointments.
Chair, with your indulgence, is it possible just for me to complete this line of questioning? I have
How many more questions have you got?
Just about 2 more minutes on this email, and then perhaps I can hand it to you at that point, Chair, if that's okay?
Yes, we'll see how we go towards it. Yeah.
Yes. And was that, do you recall the name of the person who asked you from the Deputy Premier's office? Was it a Mr. Joseph?
I feel nervous about naming them given the introduction.
I'm sorry, but this is a part,
if I'm
you're entitled.
chair, is it?
You are. Yes, sorry, it's a question I'm being asked.
You just said you're taking direction from that person.
Yeah.
We'd like to know.
I just wanted to check. Thanks.
Yes.
Mr. Joseph Brayford.
Joseph Brayford asked you. And I think my only other question on this particular email is, after your General Counsel transmitted it, and thank you for clarifying who it transmitted it to.
That's okay.
Did your General Counsel notify you that he had provided that advice to the Public Sector Commission? And incidentally, can you explain why the Public Sector Commission all of a sudden had an interest in this on the 21st of September 2021?
Yeah.
Why were they a relevant party in this?
They were specifically asked the question around amending the GSC Act because, as the Independent Public Service Commission, they're almost kind of custodians of that, the mechanism, if you will. And so they were the General Counsel there was simply asked for her opinion as to whether amending it this way would be a good idea or whether it had risks associated with it.
Did you ever interrogate Mr. Bradford, is it?
Brayford.
Brayford, as to why the Minister was seeking this particular advice?
I did not.
Did he express any views as to what the Deputy Premier's motive was when the Deputy Premier requested advice about how to convert these into ministerial appointments?
I just provided policy advice as I would for any other matter.
Did he in any way convey that this was a request from the Deputy Premier himself?
Yes.
Okay, we're right.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
you might
sorry,
not be
just
jumping.
Just to be clear, Ms. Brown.
There with
Just
the
to be
first
clear,
round.
Ms.
What did he
Brown.
say?
Mr. Brayford, in asking you made it clear that Mr. Barilaro made the request to transfer these to ministerial appointment?
No, Mr. Brayford made it clear that the Deputy Premier wanted to know the various mechanisms for which sticks could be appointed.
Okay, great, excellent. Right, I just wanted to turn back to September 2021, so September last year, and there was various emails that were going on within Treasury New South Wales, but also Investment New South Wales. This one's Investment New South Wales, where it says a high-level update for Lisa/Amy on the 15th of September. And it says the Senior Trade Investment Commissioner America's preferred candidate identified, proceeding with background checks and preparing briefs, contract in final stage of draft, targeting October start date. Did that contract get finalised?
That contract was never issued. And the formal offer was never made.
So the reports in the media of the Premier speaking to the referred applicant are incorrect, do you know? You're aware?
That is incorrect. Sorry, did I do a double negative?
Going back to...
Yeah.
Going
the
back
Premier
to...
did not speak directly with the candidate.
So in October then, there was an email again within Investment New South Wales from the Director of People and Culture,
Okay.
which referred to the fact that Minister Ayres wanted to meet with two of the STIC roles. Which two were they?
That was with respect to the STIC ASEAN and the STIC India and Middle East.
That's right. So, and Minister Ayres met with those two. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The Minister said, I think there was an email dated the 5th of November that the Minister was happy to progress those two to the Premier for his approval. Did that occur?
That email came from someone who was filling in my Chief of Staff role. She was a temporary employee on secondment from another department, and she completely misunderstood the basis for which sticks are appointed.
What? Explain further.
Because she said the Minister is happy for these appointments to proceed to the Premier for approval. A, the Premier does not approve stick appointments, and B, we never progressed anything to the Premier for approval or even noting.
Did Minister Ayres request to meet with any other of the Commissioner appointments?
I requested that Minister Ayres meet with those two appointments, with the stick for Greater China and with one of the shortlisted candidates for Stick Americas, who is not Mr. Barilaro.
And why wasn't Minister Ayres requested to meet with the final successful preferred applicant in the second round, Mr. John Barilaro? Why was that request not made?
I was in two minds about the candidate who ended up being runner-up in that process, and I wanted to see how that person presented themselves to a minister, to see whether or not they were likely to have the confidence of the minister in that scenario. And I was present at the meeting, and by the end of that meeting I had concluded that they were not a good fit for the role.
Sorry, which minister were you?
Minister Ayres.
So Minister Ayres met with several of the applicants, several of the preferred candidates, but not with Mr. Barilaro.
Beg your pardon, he only met with one of the preferred candidates for Stick Americas, the person who ended up becoming runner-up.
Okay, so I just wanted to turn to the lease in the New York, whatever lease has been taken up somewhere in New York. So there's a milestone report that I have, which is a New York milestone report, referred to. Let's see, what date was it? In 14th of September. A slideshow titled Global New South Wales Expansion Program Workstream Status Meeting 14th of September 2021. And it states in here, there's a whole timeline in fact, and it states in here that a lease was signed.
Yeah.
Well, it says sign lease in August 20. 2021. Did that
Yes.
occur?
Yes. Fortunately, I've just been given the answer by my team.
that's lucky.
Yeah, so this is relevant to the questioning from before as well. So the New York lease commenced on the 1st of September 2021. Cost is $88,000 US per year. Square meterage is 103.7 square meters. It was taken as a shell, and it took 6 months minimum to do the fit out to make it usable office space.
How much did the fit out cost?
I will get my team to find that out. And as you say, Ms. Sharp, it's in the Australian Consulate in New York and has been occupied since May 2022 when the fit out has been completed.
So the milestone report here does suggest that there was going to be an official launch of the New York office back in late November 2021. Were you aware of that time frame?
I was not aware that that was originally the time frame, although given we wanted to progress the rollout of the network with fervour, doesn't surprise me that that ambition was created.
And that the construction was to be complete, obviously, by that stage as well.
Given
So,
it took 6
because
months
the-
to fit out, I'm surprised about that component of it, so I can get more information if you like.
But the office, so when was the construction, when was the fit out completed?
Well, it's been occupied since May 2022, so it was completed by then.
Can I check whether there have been? I understand there are global hubs, and then there are spokes.
That's
This
right.
hub and spokes model
Precisely.
have the spokes in terms of those positions been filled in the Americas?
Predominantly, no. The Americas is the part of our network that needs the most completion, if you will. Most of the spokes are a shared office arrangement with Austrade, and indeed some of the employees in the spokes are employed through Austrade for ease of employee kind of arrangements. So, but my awareness is there is still a number of roles that need to be recruited in the Americas, yes.
So, what was your involvement in the original recruitment process for the Americas?
So the original recruitment process launched on the 2nd of April 2021, which was only a couple of days after Investment New South Wales was established, and I was on the panel and essentially leading the recruitment process. Yes.
This is in the first round?
That's correct, 2021.
Okay, and so why was the preferred applicant in all of the information that we have up until, in fact, September 2021, the internal documents still say that a preferred applicant has been chosen for the Americas? What happened that was no longer the case?
So we conducted a recruitment process including panel interviews. There was a first ranked candidate who I believe has been talked about quite a bit in the public domain. She was verbally offered the role, and then I was given a direction by government to cease the recruitment due to a change in government policy to convert the roles into statutory officers appointed by a minister.
And so that direction by government came from who?
Well, it was a decision of government. It would have come through the responsible minister, being the Minister for Industry and Trade.
It was?
Mr. John Barilaro.
So that was Mr. And you're saying a decision by government, are you referring to a cabinet decision?
It was a decision by government.
And it came through
I can't
by
comment on the
Mr.
mechanism.
Barilaro. Are you aware of what day that occurred?
Approximately 27th of September.
Thank you. Mr.
So-
Borzak.
Thank you. So Mr. Barilaro created the positions, and then a recruitment process which you participated in went through the motions of recruiting. You had a preferred candidate which had been nominated or told verbally that she had the role, and then an instruction came through that was to change. Is that your evidence?
The one correction that I would make is that the roles were announced as part of the Global New South Wales strategy, which was a strategy that was approved by government. in late 2019. It was launched by former Premier Barilaro and former Deputy Premier John Barilaro and the then Treasurer Dominic Perrottet, and that document essentially created the roles.
Okay, the role's been created.
Yeah.
The recruitment's been done. A person has been verbally told they have the role, and then, and tell me if I'm wrongly characterising this, an instruction comes from Minister Barilaro that this whole process is to stop and that person is to be told that she's not now got the role. Is that true?
It was a decision of the government that involved...
No, well, that's
but
not... That,
I'm
you
just
keep
saying what
that your evidence also said the instruction came from the Minister Barilaro.
Chair, I'm going to raise a point of order,
Right.
and I hate to do this, but
That's not true.
well, no,
quick-
it just
quick
seems
to
to,
it, quick
seems to
to
be.
it, Mr.
I hate having to redo it.
Order.
wasting
You will
people's
quickly
time.
get to your point of order.
The point of order is that Ms Brown is trying to provide an answer. The deputy chair is talking over the top of her.
There
We
is
have
no-
a procedural fairness resolution that allows the witness to complete her
Thank you,
answer
Mr.
before.
Fang. There is no point of order. That exchange was fair enough, and I'm trying to be fair to the witness, but that exchange was fair enough. Continue, Mr. Borzak.
Ms Brown, who actually then phoned the preferred candidate and told her that she didn't have the job?
I did.
You did. Okay, thank you. And who actually told you to do that?
A decision of the government was made that included an instruction to me
By who?
to... I'll just finish answering the question. To unwind all contracts for those yet to commence.
But by who?
It was a decision of the
It didn't come from
government.
a computer voice. Someone must have told you. Who instructed you to do that?
Well, it was a decision of the government, so I could actually...
How did you get it? Was it
Read
an
it.
How did you get the
email? Was it a
instruction?
text? Was it a phone call?
I'll need to take advice on whether or not I can disclose the mechanism, but government decisions are generally made.
Sorry, but I'll take a point of order. I will take a point of order. Just perhaps it might be helpful for the witness to be made aware that under the Parliamentary Evidence Act, the questions are legitimate. Can't be taken on notice just because you're not confident whether or not you're in a position to give an answer.
That's right.
The question is actually, this is evidence under the Parliamentary Evidence Act, and the answer can't be withheld on the basis that there's any ambiguity in the ability to answer the question. And the question was pretty straightforward. How was Ms Brown requested to make the phone call?
Well, to the
Thank you,
point of
Mr.
order.
Mr. Mookie. I think
To the
to the point of order.
To the point of order. The witness has indicated that she'll take the question on notice. There's a number of reasons why she may have done so. It may be to also seek clarity as to which mechanism was made. There's a number of points that
You don't
Thank
get
you,
to- you don't get to
Mr.
speculate on the
Order.
answers.
Exactly.
gonna talk
I've
over
I've
me as well?
heard
Are you
Mr. Fang's point of. I've heard Mr. Fang speaking to the point of order, and I believe Ms. Brown was actually questioning whether she could give certain evidence, but as Mr. Mookie said, that is not something to take on notice. If you're remembering, if you seem to be quite clear in terms of how you have received it, and that was the question put to you in this inquiry. So, Mr. Borzak, you were asking a question, but continue on your answer, Ms. Brown.
I said a decision was made by
That
the
was in
government
relation
that
to,
I
I
had
think, which mechanism,
and I
how
had
you heard that
visibility
decision.
of that decision.
Sorry, say that.
I had
again.
visibility of that decision, and so I knew exactly what I had been instructed
Can
to
I-
do.
Well, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I just wanted to get some clarity here. When you say by government, you mean that there's been a cabinet or a subcommittee decision. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that means that through the cabinet system, when you talk about having visibility, it means that you're getting a direction, or that you're advised of that. Was there then subsequently a direction given to you after being advised of this change?
No, I was advised of it formally through the system, and then I acted upon it because it was...
Just to be clear here, this change in policy
Yeah.
was effected through Cabinet. And as you said in reply to one of the questions I think the Chair asked, you became aware of it because Mr. Barilaro was the minister responsible for that decision, correct? And then on basis of your knowledge of that decision, you then acted on the instruction from Mr. Barilaro, however it was communicated to you, to contact a successful candidate who was given a verbal offer and withdraw that offer.
So I did not have a conversation with Mr. Barilaro
His
about
office.
the decision of government. The reason I'm struggling a bit is I need to take advice about whether the mechanism is a cabinet in confidence matter
There's a lot of ambiguity about what goes to Cabinet and what doesn't. So, hence the question about whether the request was coming from the Minister's office or coming from the Cabinet, because you are entitled to not comment on Cabinet matters, but if it was coming from the Minister, Barilaro's office, you're not. Hence, I think the reason why the Deputy Chair is pushing you on this point. So I guess the question is, do you have specific, did you have discussions with the Minister's office at any point after the Cabinet decision about why that was now the modus operandi that you were meant to follow?
No, I was acting on the decision of government.
We'll go back to questions from Mr. Balzac if we can.
In relation to your role in the recruitment process, and I'm still exactly not quite clear on all of that, you said that you were part of the recruitment panel, is that true?
Beg your pardon, which process were you referring to?
The recruitment process for round 2?
That is correct.
Yeah. And that being the case, I've seen, certainly in a statement from Investment New South Wales, that there was deemed to have been no conflict of interest in your role as CEO of Investment New South Wales and that recruitment process. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay. In your evidence earlier, you said that you had effectively knocked out the number 2 candidate after that candidate had been interviewed, I suppose, or met the Minister. Is that true?
Met the Minister, yes.
Met the Minister? Okay. Did the Minister actually spend any time talking to the preferred candidate?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not in your
He
presence?
may have. Certainly not in my presence.
Would that have been part of a process?
That would not have been part of a process, no. No Minister.
So why was the second candidate taken by the hand by you to see the then Minister, Mr Ayres, but not the previous Minister, Mr Barilaro, who was the preferred candidate?
The second candidate was not particularly familiar with government, and so I thought a meet and greet would be prudent so that I could see how that candidate presented themselves to the Minister and get a sense of whether or not they were going to A, be able to brief a Minister well, and B, whether or not the Minister would have confidence in that person to represent us globally.
So why would you not do the same with Mr Barilaro?
I didn't see it as necessary. He was well known to the Minister already.
But he was supposed to be the best candidate. He was never involved in a public service role.
That's true, but he was the first ranked candidate against the relevant criteria.
In your role of establishing him as the first ranked candidate, do you think that there was, or there could have been a perception of a conflict of interest in that you reported to him?
Saying I reported to him mischaracterises the relationship between the agency head and a portfolio minister. I was accountable to him in his role as Minister for Trade and Industry. I did not derive a personal benefit in making the appointment. It's quite common for agency heads and other senior public servants to interview candidates they've had dealings with previously. The panel involved a panel of 5 people with different perspectives, including the Independent Public Service Commissioner, who did not raise a concern.
Well, thank you, Ms Brown. Just so I understand, and you say that you received no benefit, I understand that your immediate employment history, you were appointed to the role of Chief Executive Officer of Investment New South Wales in or around March 2021. Is that true?
That is true.
And your grade was at that level of was at the level of Deputy Secretary in January of this year. You were promoted to Secretary of the Department of Enterprise and Trade.
I was.
You were, yes. But you've essentially retained the duties of, or oversight of the duties of the CEO of Investment New South Wales. Is that also true?
That is also true.
So you continue with that process and those responsibilities?
That is true.
When you were CEO of Investment New South Wales, who actually did you report to? Did you report to Gary Barnes?
No, I did not. I was a head of an executive agency. My employment contract was held by the Secretary of Department of Premier and Cabinet. They were the principal department with respect to my agency.
Okay.
You can keep going if you want to, because they took something on time. Do you want any more?
Oh, I've got a fair bit more. I'll come back.
All right, okay. Questions from the opposition, Mr Daniel Mulkey.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Brown, we might just return to some of the events of September last year, and thank you for establishing some of the chain of events. We've established that on or about, I think you said the 6th of September, you had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Braidwood, I think that's how you pronounce his name?
Brayford.
In which you were asked to prepare advice as to alternative methods of appointment. He then makes a request on the 21st of, your General Counsel sends an email to the PSC on the 21st of September, and we've now established that there's in Cabinet or some direction of government is given to you around the 27th of September to withdraw the verbal offer to the successful candidate in the first round. I just want to turn to what happens after that. Do you mind turning to page 48 of the tender bundle, please?
Okay.
This is just on page 48, it's a chain of correspondence which is predominantly about how this will be communicated from Investment New South Wales to NGS Global, which were the recruiters.
That's right.
And you can see here that this is, again, I'm only going to refer to them by their title and not their name as well, but you can see here in the middle of the page, your Chief of Staff is emailing another member of your team and says this, FYI, Amy will speak with the lead recruiter. But needless to say, there are no more sticks whose appointment investment will be involved with now, so shortlisting panels, etc., all no longer needed. Now, why was your Chief of Staff under the impression on the 1st of October that Investment New South Wales would have no further involvement in the recruitment process for the sticks?
Because government had made a decision that they were to be statutory officers appointed by a minister.
Okay, and who was meant to now then be taking the lead in that alternative process?
There was never a conversation as to how it would be affected, whether or not Investment New South Wales had a secretariat role, for example, but it would have been a decision of the responsible minister of that portfolio.
Are you aware of how your Chief of Staff came to be aware that investment will have no further involvement?
I would have told her, yes.
You would have told her?
Yeah.
And so at this point, you also were operating off the assumption that investment would have no further involvement, correct?
Correct.
And how did you form that impression?
Because I read the government decision.
Okay, so are we to infer from that that in whatever document led to the government's decision, it made clear that investment wouldn't be involved?
I think to say that we wouldn't be involved is an inference. Perhaps what it should have said is Investment New South Wales was not the decision-making body.
Okay, let's just go forward then. If you take that's an inference, I take your point on the basis of this email that it might be the right conclusion. But can we now turn to page 49?
Yep.
This is an email that you then send to the recruiter on the 3rd of October 2021, which, given it was a day before my birthday, I prefer was probably on the long weekend, actually. So
It was the long weekend.
It was, yes. It was the day before Labor Day. Anyway, you can see...
Is that your birthday or what?
Order.
Here you can see, this is the correspondence you're sending to the lead recruiter on a Sunday of a long weekend at 2:13 p.m. You'll see this. I'm just going to take you to the highlighted sections. I appreciate that you'll keep this confidential, but we've now had confirmed instructions to commence the preparation of legislation to convert the global senior trade and investment commissioners to statutory officers, i.e. ministerial appointments. You go on to say the Agent General for London and the stick for Tokyo will be transitioned. Just going down as well, you can then say, this means that the recruitment process for the stick positions in Singapore, India, Middle East and China will need to be ceased, and all candidates informed that we're going and not going any further in the process. Yep. We will be handling the stick New York position as an internal matter. What did you mean by that when you said we will be handling the stick New York position as an internal matter?
Because the first ranked candidate from the first process was an internal employee of Investment New South Wales, I wanted to tell her myself.
Sure. So but that's not the way in which this paragraph is constructed. And look, it might be the case that that's what you meant, but it says here that the recruitment process for the stick positions will need to be ceased and all candidates informed. You're saying that you wanted to inform the candidate yourself that there wouldn't be proceeding.
Yes, I said we'll be handling the stick New York position as an internal matter.
Sure.
And I meant the closeout because the recruiter normally phones unsuccessful candidates, and I thought that might be a bit harsh given the candidate worked for me.
And down below, when you say, as you will note, I appreciate, most of the above has been outside of our control, are you referring to the fact that this is a decision of government and not Investment New South Wales?
Correct.
So can we go back up here, please, to the first paragraph? in which you say, we've now had confirmed instructions to commence the preparation of legislation.
Yes.
Who gave you those instructions?
It's what the decision of government said.
Yes, but who told you to prepare it? You said you have confirmed instructions to commence the preparation of legislation. Were you asked to do so by a minister's office?
No, I just had read the decision.
Did you have any other discussions with ministers or ministers' officers about those instructions?
I might take on notice, I did meet with the Deputy Premier's office after the decision of government was made to talk about practicalities. So
between the 27th of September and the 1st of October?
Between the 27th of September and the day that the Deputy Premier resigned, somewhere in there I met with his
October,
office
yes.
just to talk through
And
what
who
it
did you
all meant.
meet with?
Beg your pardon?
Who did you meet with?
Joseph Braceford.
Thank you.
Joseph Braceford.
So what was his position in the Deputy Premier's office?
I believe he was a senior policy advisor.
So you had a discussion about the practicalities of preparing this legislation. When were you meant to have the legislation prepared by?
We were not given a timeline.
Well, what were you given? What information were you given about the practicalities that you were meant to meet?
The instruction was just to commence preparation of legislation, and then it was for us to work through all the implications of that, come up with a timeline, process.
Did you do that?
We did not get that far.
Why not?
Because the deputy premier resigned, and the portfolio got reassigned to Minister Ayres.
So the Deputy Premier resigns a day after you do this, or you send this particular email. So in response to the question I asked my colleague, sometime between the 27th of September and the 1st of October, you meet to discuss the practicalities with the Deputy Premier's office. I heard that correctly?
That's correct.
And you have a discussion in which what was discussed? Like, what were you asked to do? Anything formally, or was it just a general catch-up?
It was a really high-level discussion, probably as part of my usual one-to-one, to say, we're now proceeding down a different avenue, it's going to take some time.
Okay, and then the Deputy Premier resigns on the 4th of October,
Yes.
And then somehow the government reverses its position of converting this to ministerial appointments. Can you shed light as to how that happened?
The government did not reverse its position.
Are we still converting these to statutory officers?
So I had a conversation with the incoming portfolio minister.
Who was?
Minister Stuart Ayres.
Yep.
For context...
Sorry, did you have that conversation?
I'll just set a little bit of context. Okay. For context, on the 1st of October, the trade statement was launched, and that had ambitious targets of us accelerating the rollout of the global program to double the value of exports from $96 billion to $200 billion by 2030. In light of that, and the need to progress the global rollout with fervour, he and I discussed that we were acutely aware that the introduction and passage of legislation would create significant delays to the global rollout. So his preference was that we continued with what we're calling tranche 1 of the global rollout, and once that has been completed, we would, he's the responsible minister, but I expect he will revisit the question about legislation.
So when did you have that conversation with Minister Ayres, in which Minister Ayres expressed that view to you?
Within the first few days of him becoming portfolio minister.
And when you say tranche 1, you're referring to these 6 appointments?
That is correct, and all the staff that support them,
Sure.
55 staff.
So, Minister Ayres had the authority to reverse the government's decision?
He wasn't reversing the decision. He was coming up with a timeline for implementation that made sense in the context.
He was choosing for those not to be ministerial appointments while they were being completed.
At this point.
So, therefore, are we to infer that it is still government policy to convert these to ministerial positions?
That is a matter. The Cabinet has since been reconstituted, and it was the decision of the Cabinet prior to reconstitution, so it's a matter for them.
Well, it stands in the meantime until it's reversed. It's a decision of Cabinet. It's, to your knowledge, yet to be reversed. Is that correct?
Yes, but I'll wait instructions.
Well, have you prepared? It's now been a year, close to a year. No, maybe not. I'm not that old. It's been at least 10 months. You've had now 10 months to go about implementing this particular decision of government. Has Investment New South Wales prepared draft legislation that would convert these positions?
We're still rolling out the network, and Mr. Mookie, just for context, we've had 6 admin orders that have impacted our department and our agency and then department with machinery of government changes, which has been very consuming of my people, particularly my General Counsel and his staff. So I don't think they've had a chance to turn their mind to it in the absence of instruction to do
What
otherwise.
conversations did you have with Minister Ayres or people in his office about how, given that the New York position had been rescinded, and there had been an intention for it to be a ministerial appointment, but clearly there was a process that was going to start without that occurring. What discussions did you have, and what were the nature of the discussions in terms of the way in which this appointment could be made?
Excellent question. So once a verbal offer had been made to the first candidate, we were not in a position to commence...
Sorry, could you just clarify the date that occurred on?
Certainly, 12th of August 2021.
Thank you.
A verbal offer was made to the candidate.
Yep.
Before we could enter into substantive contract negotiations, there were quite significant tax structuring issues that emerged, particularly in terms of how Investment New South Wales established itself as a foreign office in the US jurisdiction. So I wasn't in a position to put a contract on the table until that was resolved. That turned out to be a lot more complicated than we thought. In fact, it was only resolved on the 8th of December this year. So once that emerged, I had a conversation with Minister Ayres as the portfolio minister to say, even if we wanted to progress with Stick Americas and offer somebody the job now, we can't. So why don't we work our way through this tax issue and then we'll do another recruitment process.
Did you ever discuss having this appointment as a direct appointment?
Sorry, can you clarify the question?
Well, my understanding is that you, under the Act, that you're able to decide that this... that basically this you could basically have gone to Minister Ayres and said we could make a direct appointment in relation to this. Was there ever are you aware of any discussion ever about that?
That would not have been best practice. I would not have advised it.
Do you know whether Mr. Barilaro ever asked Mr. Ayres for a direct appointment in relation to this position?
Certainly not to my awareness.
Can I ask, when you were first meeting with Minister Ayres, which took place somewhere presumably from the 5th of October onwards in that week, did you inform Minister Ayres that Minister Barilaro had requested that you withdraw the verbal offer that was made?
Mr. Barilaro didn't request me to withdraw the verbal offer. The decision of government specifically referred...
Right. So Minister Ayres was aware of that as a result of his participation in that decision-making
Yes, because he's the member
process?
of the government, yeah.
And did he raise any concerns with you about that, or did you provide any evidence... Did you have any discussion with him about the call that you made to the successful candidate?
I said it was in the context of what I just described around the tax structuring. I said we did have a great candidate from the first round. We could essentially resurrect that process, I suppose, but it seemed like a foolish thing to do in light of the fact that it will be months before we could actually appoint someone.
But why not? Well, I mean, given that we had already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars recruiting a person who you've just said now was an excellent candidate. You told that candidate on the 27th of September or thereabouts that she wasn't getting the role.
1st of October.
Sorry, 1st of October you told her that she wasn't getting the role. And then 6 days later or thereabouts, you're advising Minister Ayres about the problems about the tax issues, but you have a candidate who you've assessed as being excellent for the job. Why don't you just simply say to Minister Ayres, let's just appoint this successful candidate in December rather than having to run a whole second process?
That's a very good question. So that candidate, I gave that candidate early visibility that government was considering the policy change in terms of the basis of appointment of sticks. So she had been aware for a couple of weeks before the news was delivered. And then, of course, the news was confirmed, as I just said, on the 1st of October. She was extremely upset about that, understandably so. And so, to me, the fact that we couldn't appoint anyone for some period of time and the fact that she was very unhappy with the arrangements and government, the whole situation felt quite irreconcilable.
So, the reason why you weren't in a position to support a successful candidate in December, when you were in a position to appoint a candidate, having resolved the tax issues, was because you took a view that irreconcilable differences had emerged as a result of how the government had treated this successful woman. That's the evidence.
That's a fair characterisation.
And why is the government saying there's no suitable candidate identified, given that you're saying Ms West was an excellent candidate and it was clear from the recruitment process that she met or exceeded all the expectations for the role?
As I just foreshadowed, the relationship declined quite quickly once she was informed that she may not be going to New York. And so by the end of the first process, I'd formed the view that no suitable candidate.
Secretary Brown, Premier Perrottet told the Legislative Assembly last week, word for word, the first recruitment process did not identify a suitable candidate. Clearly, the first recruitment process did identify a suitable candidate. Then the government changed its mind. Then the government changed its mind again. Then the government, in the process of changing its mind twice, seemingly maltreated the successful candidate, and then finds itself in a position in December where it has to relaunch the process that ends up appointing the former Deputy Premier. Is that a fair characterisation of events?
The reason the relationship with the candidate was irreconcilable wasn't just because government was changing its mind. I had some concerns about the candidate and their suitability for the role from mid-September onwards.
Secretary, when Premier Perrottet went in front of the Legislative Assembly and said to the Legislative Assembly the first recruitment process did not identify a suitable candidate, did you give him that advice?
Yes, because I closed the recruitment process on the 1st of October, and by then, I, as the employer and decision maker, had formed the view that the person who was previously the first-ranked candidate was not, in fact, suitable for the role.
And that's because 4 days earlier, the government decided that it wanted to appoint it through a ministerial appointment as opposed to the process that the candidates were told. Because to be clear here, it's not just a successful candidate. All applicants in the first round proceeded on the basis that this would not be a ministerial appointment. And the government changed its mind on the 27th of October. You informed the candidate on the 1st of October. You're then telling me that you then concluded that on the basis of that conversation, irreconcilable differences had emerged.
So I first informed the candidate on the 17th of September that things were likely to go this way. And it was then that the relationship between the candidate and Investment New South Wales became troublesome. And so by the 1st of October, when I, as decision maker, officially closed the recruitment process, I was of the view that there were no suitable candidates.
But do you accept that in giving the Premier this advice, when the Premier then stood up in the Legislative Assembly and said that the first recruitment process did not identify a suitable candidate, that was a statement likely to mislead?
No, because at the end of the first recruitment process, which was on the 1st of October 2021, I, as decision maker, had formed a view that there was no suitable candidate.
But just to be clear, you were on the selection panel for the first candidate. You wrote up and had the other 3 members, very eminent people on that, signed off on this candidate as in the through that process. You'd done all of the diligence checks in relation to this candidate.
Yep.
You had recommended and liaised with the ministers, both the Premier, the Treasurer and the Deputy Premier, in relation to this candidate. So all the way along, you basically had put her forward and had full confidence in her ability to do this position. Are you saying to us that because she was upset that the government had changed the role, that you then decided that she was unsuitable?
So, 2 things. Firstly, I did not canvass the opinion of any minister or the Premier with respect to the first candidate. They
you didn't brief any of the ministers, the Premier, the Treasurer, the Deputy Premier, in relation to this appointment.
I'll take a point of order at that point, Chair, because I think...
She's doing fine, Wes. You don't need to run interference.
Sorry, but the witness
Order,
has actually started answering the question.
Yes, I'm aware, but a point of order has been taken. We'll hear it very quickly.
So Ms Sharp interjected over the top of Ms Brown as she was providing the answer. She may well have provided the answer that Ms Sharp wanted.
Yeah, Mr Fang, okay, I've heard the point of order that
But I keep having to make it, Chair.
Ms Sharp did not interject over the response of Ms Brown.
She did. We'll table
Penny,
later.
had you finished your?
I'd like to clarify the
yeah,
answer
let's-
because it's...
Yeah,
If you
because
could,
Mr.
it's
Sang
quite
interrupted.
important, yes.
So
thank
on the
you.
11th of August,
Brown.
for noting briefs, so after the, let's go chronologically, 21st of July 2021, the interviews were conducted, and the selection report was signed by all panel members. On the 11th of August, I sent briefing notes informing the then Premier Berejiklian and the then Deputy Premier Barilaro, the then Treasurer Perrottet and Minister Ayres, that the candidate was preferred and the name of that candidate, but I didn't engage with them before or seek views or anything like that. As I said, she was then verbally offered the role, but on the 17th of September, I gave her an early heads up that things might not be proceeding the way she had hoped, and quite significant issues emerged with respect to the candidate and her relationship with Investment New South Wales, which I'm happy to discuss in camera.
Can I just do one,
Yeah, sure.
one follow-up, which is, did you ever contact her to congratulate her for getting the role?
I did.
Ms. Brown, what were your reasons to the first preferred applicant for stopping that recruitment process when you phoned her that day?
When I gave her an
What
early
reasons did you give?
when I closed the
Yes.
the reason that I gave is that government had made a decision that these were to be converted to ministerial appointments.
Did they reapply when it was re-advertised?
No, they did not.
Were they requested not to apply?
Most certainly not.
Do you think were you expecting them to apply given how well they did in the first round?
The relationship had deteriorated quite some bit, so I was not surprised when they did not apply.
So was exactly the same recruitment process undertaken for the second round as the first round?
The process was the same, but the panel was different.
So with the first round, so in terms of assessing people against various requirements, as I
Yes.
understand it, I have something in front of me which is called a panel interview rating, and the candidate names aren't here, but there's various qualities that they're ranked against, one of which is to work collaboratively, which a couple of the applicants in the first round exceeded that quality. Another one is influence and negotiate. Those two applicants exceeded that quality. Another one is deliver results. They exceeded that quality. Another one is manage and develop people, and they met those qualities. Did I assume Mr. Barilaro undertook this same rating?
He did, yes.
Did he exceed all of those as well? Did Mr. Barilaro exceed the work collaboratively quality?
I will take that on notice. I believe that we are providing a copy of the panel report. What I can tell you is that he was the first ranked candidate against the criteria.
And just to check as well, did he exceed the manage and develop people quality?
I'll take it on notice.
Did Mr. Barilaro undertake,
friendly
like
Geordies.
the other candidates did, undertake a psychometric assessment?
He did. It's called an occupational personality questionnaire.
Okay. So, why? So, getting down to when Mr. Barilaro is the preferred candidate the second time around.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, no. Let's step back a little bit. When Mr. Barilaro first applied for the position, after he had the conversation with you about this was in terms of the direction from government at a particular time. Is that correct?
No, I never had a conversation with Mr. Barilaro around government's direction to change to ministerial appointments. I simply read it as a government decision.
And so, the conversation that Mr. Barilaro had with you that you mentioned earlier.
Of course. So I had one meeting with Mr. Barilaro in the entire time that I was accountable to him as Minister for Industry and Trade. It was on the 15th of September via Teams. For context, we were in statewide lockdowns and there was an outbreak of Delta in the regions. He apologised for the fact that he had been fully occupied by that scenario, and he said we were going to have a good year in 2022 because we were hoping to do another tranche of the global rollout. It was a very short conversation.
Did you find it? Did you speak to anybody about the fact that Mr. Barilaro had applied for the position? Did you speak to anybody within government, any minister, that had occurred?
After he applied?
At any stage, but before he was offered the job, did you speak to anybody about the fact that he had applied?
The only conversation I ever had about Mr. Barilaro applying for this role was with the responsible portfolio minister, Minister Stuart Ayres. He gave me a heads up that Mr. Barilaro might apply, and then Ms. Barilaro did apply, and somewhere in that process, I let the minister know that had occurred.
Did the minister express any concerns to you about how this may play out publicly, about the fact that Mr. Barilaro did apply for this job?
He did not. Minister Ayres' portfolio minister is very respectful of the public service and our processes, and so he was very cautious about not having those sort of conversations.
Okay. I might just go to you, Mr. Borzak, at this stage.
Okay.
Explain that.
Sorry?
Can you just explain?
Yeah, sure.
Appropriately cautious.
Okay, but how was that conveyed to you?
As in, I'd given Minister Ayres a heads up that Mr. Barilaro had applied, but he didn't give me a strong opinion as to how he expected that process to play out. He let me run the process.
And when did you tell Mr. Ayres that Mr. Barilaro had applied?
It would have been, Mr. Barilaro applied on the 19th of January. We received 12 applications, including that one. And I expect somewhere in the shortlisting process, which would have been a week to 10 days later, I gave him a heads up that Mr. Barilaro was on the shortlist.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Borzak?
Thank you. Just going back to my previous line of questioning in relation to your position as CEO of Investment New South Wales and potential for conflict of interest.
Kate, you're right. You can
Sorry?
fire away.
Fire away.
I'm just trying to retract the cheese.
Again, I ask you, as CEO of Investment New South Wales, who did you actually report to? Or who physically in your line of report did you report to?
The employer of the head of an agency in this context, as in my context, beg your pardon, was the Secretary of Department of Premier and Cabinet.
The Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet at
That's
the time?
right.
Okay, thank you.
That's right.
When did you get promoted to the role of Secretary of Enterprise and Trade?
The 30th of January, 2022.
30th of January 2022.
Oh, beg your pardon, 31st of January 2022.
31st of January, okay. 22. Did you make an application for that role of Secretary, or were you directly appointed without a recruitment process?
I was directly appointed without recruitment process, as is permissible under the arrangements for secretaries.
Okay, you were directly appointed. So there was no recruitment process for you to go through on a competitive basis, as, for example, was occurring for these trade roles. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes. Me and 3 other secretaries were all appointed during the same kind of 7 to 10 day period, and none of us went through competitive processes.
So at that time, who was the minister that appointed you into that role?
So Minister Ayres was the Senior Cluster Minister for Enterprise, Investment and Trade, and of course Premier Perrottet was the Premier, and the order is made by Premier Perrottet as the Premier for all secretaries.
So you... Okay.
There you go. Is that line of questioning?
Ms Brown,
Is this a new line of query? Or just Mr. Morkey?
oh, sorry. Yeah,
Right.
okay, yeah,
go.
all right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Your appointment coincided with the formation of the cluster, correct?
Okay, so there are 6 administrative orders. The department was established on the 21st of December. We had this conversation in
We did,
estimates,
didn't
remember,
we?
when we had
Yeah,
two
yeah,
employees?
yeah.
That was good.
Oh, it's deja vu.
I enjoyed reading that back. So the
Not as much as I did.
The department was established on the 21st of December. I was commenced as secretary on the 31st of January.
Yes.
It became, and then Investment New South Wales was brought in on the 17th of February.
Yes, and then thereafter, there was a recommendation to the State Officers Remuneration Tribunal, was there not, relating to you?
Me and 3 other secretaries all at the same time.
And when did that happen?
When did it? Oh, I'll take it on notice. It's publicly available. I just don't. I've got
Yes,
a lot
thank
of
you.
dates in front of me.
Sorry about that.
Robert?
That was it.
Robert, over to you.
Oh, sorry.
Did you want us to?
No, you can keep going.
Okay, we're happy to move on.
Yeah, move
Great,
on.
thank you.
Can I? You want to go first?
Yeah, just quickly. In relation to your congratulations to the successful applicant, did you ever provide her with a gift in relation to that?
It was a text message.
The text message. Didn't give her provide her with a bottle of champagne?
No, I did not.
Okay,
Did Investment New South Wales?
Did it? Yeah,
No.
did Investment. Okay, thank you. When you did any minister or minister's office ever tell you not to proceed with the preferred candidate's application appointment?
No, only the decision of government that I referred to before.
So there's never been an express direction to you in relation to that.
No, and I was very light touch in terms of my engagement with ministers with respect to this appointment.
Thank you.
Can I just, Secretary Brown, just to, earlier on you made the point that Mr Barilaro was effectively given a verbal offer on the 23rd of May, is that right? Did I recall that?
That's when his contract discussions commenced. That's why I have that date documented in writing.
When was he first given a verbal offer?
So he actually reports into the Managing Director of Trade and Investment, Kylie Bell. So she would have spoken to him at some point before that, but not much before that.
So sometime in May, correct?
Yes.
And is that because, when did the selection panel that recommended Mr Barilaro complete its final report?
So the report itself was not signed until, by all members, until the 15th of June. The reason being that Ms Katharina Lowe was on leave for the entirety of May.
So as his employer, when did you decide he was the person for the job?
Let me just check. In terms of my decision. It would have been at the sometime end of, here we go, by the 1st of April.
You decided by the 1st of April
Yep.
that he was the candidate?
Yes, that's right.
Correct. Okay. And why then was there a 6-week interregnum before commencement of negotiations?
So on the 1st of April, several elements of the machinery of government change took into effect, and we went from being a department of 2 to a department of 1,000. Everybody in my operational team were very consumed by standing up an operational function, and we were very uncertain as to what budget we were going to get, and we were trying to make budget submissions to be sufficient to run a whole department. So it effectively took us out for...
Okay, you had more urgent matters to attend to.
Unfortunately, yes.
Fair enough, Secretary Brown. Between the 1st of April, after the 1st, you made the decision that Minister Barilaro was the person for the job. Did you contact Minister Ayres' office?
Yes.
Did you notify him
Yes.
of your decision?
Yes.
And when did you do that?
Sometime within April.
Yes. Do you have any specific recall?
No. I, unlike my previous portfolio minister, I catch up with this minister regularly so that I can engage on
But did
the
you notify
portfolio.
Minister Ayres verbally or by a written
Oh, it would have
brief?
just been a conversation, yes.
No briefing note?
No briefing note.
Fair enough. And did he express at that time, between 1 April and 30 April, any time in that month, any concern about your decision to appoint Mr Barilaro?
No.
Did he support your decision?
Sorry, did he support
he
my
lend-
decision?
Did he praise it, provide any support, encouragement, say to you, good call, anything like that?
He said, "You're the decision maker, so
Sure.
it's your decision."
Okay. Did he tell you whether he was intending to contact others within the government to inform them?
No, he didn't actually.
Okay. He's told the Legislative Assembly that I informed the Premier and the Deputy Premier of this recommendation on the 30th of April via a phone call. Were you aware that he was going to make those calls?
No, I wasn't.
Did you provide him any briefings to assist him in those calls?
No.
So he made that. Did he report to you the outcome of the call of the conversations with the Premier or the Deputy Premier?
No.
At any point from there on, did either the Minister Ayres, Premier Perrottet or Deputy Premier Toole express any concerns about this decision?
No.
Why then, if it was your decision and you're the employer, why then was it Minister Ayres who announced it?
Of course. As is customary, the responsible minister announces all of the senior trade and investment commissioner roles. They've announced all the other 5 because it's good news for New South Wales.
So did you draft the press release or did the Minister's office draft that press release?
It would have been a joint effort.
Okay.
How it tends
So just to be
work.
very clear here before I pass to my colleague, between sometime in April, you tell Minister Ayres, Minister Ayres tells the Premier and Deputy Premier on the 30th of April, which works out to be 6 weeks before the rest of New South Wales learns about this decision. And then throughout that period, no minister, having had 7 weeks' knowledge of this decision was coming, expressed any concern about the appropriateness of former Deputy Premier Barilaro taking this role.
Not to me.
And just again, to be finally clear here, the pattern of events that have sort of emerged through this questioning shows that Minister Barilaro intervenes to get the process changed, causes the first candidate to have her role terminated. That decision is then reversed, and then 5 months later, he walks out with the job. Can you give us the reasons as to why we should not consider that to be a highly suspicious chain of events?
So it wasn't Mr. Barilaro's decision to unwind the first recruitment process. It was a decision of government. As for the remainder of the events and how they unfolded, it's not for me to express an opinion.
Ms. Brown, I just wanted to turn again to the question of the appointment, the process of the appointment of Mr. Barilaro. So you said on the 19th of January there were 12 applications that were received and you informed Minister Ayres, is that correct?
No, sorry. I informed Minister Ayres after we'd had a go at the shortlist.
Okay, and how many people were on the shortlist?
The shortlist that went to interview, there were 4 people, but one I had already seen as part of the first process, so I said let's just interview the other 3.
Okay, and so there were 4 on the shortlist. When did you compile the shortlist?
It was compiled between the 21st of January and the 2nd of February. The reason it took a bit of time is we had a couple of candidates drop out, and so we had to redo it.
Okay, so of the 12 applications to get them down to the 4 for the shortlist,
Yep.
was that just your call?
No, it was the call of the panel.
Okay, the panel did the what was the
that's
process?
how it tends to work. So what happens is there's an executive search done by NGS. They do initial screening. It's a bit like a first round interview, and then the long shortlist. The long shortlist gets sent round to all panel members with a suggestion as to who the top 4 might be, and then that becomes the shortlist for interview purposes.
Okay, and was there any changes to that initial shortlist that was compiled by the recruiter?
Yes, there was. So I sense-checked the shortlist with Minister Ayres because I was a little bit... the first time I ran the process, I didn't consult with any minister about anything, so I wanted to sense-check along the way.
Can I just check one thing just quickly there? At any time did Minister Ayres give you a heads up that there were going to be other applicants other than John Barilaro applying?
No, he did not.
So the only person Minister Ayres provided prior warning to you about
Yes.
a likely application was John Barilaro?
That's correct.
Did you actually ever ask Mr Ayres how did he have the knowledge that Mr Barilaro was likely to be interested in this role?
No, I wasn't particularly interested.
You weren't interested in the former Deputy Premier who you used to report to all of a sudden expressing an interest in a role within months of his resignation. That didn't create any reason for you to interrogate further.
It wouldn't have been appropriate, to be honest.
Why not?
Because I'm a public servant and I implement government's decisions, and I don't really go into the who had conversations with who sort of
Secretary Brown, this
territory.
is not a government decision, it's your decision.
It is my decision, but in terms of what conversations Minister Ayres has, I don't normally engage with him on that.
Okay, so there was 4 people that were sent around by the recruiter. Was Mr. Barilaro on that list?
Yes.
Okay, and who were his referees?
I'll take that on notice if that's okay.
You don't know who... Did you do the referee check on Mr.
No,
Barilaro?
I did not. That's the recruiter's job.
Right, but can
Yeah.
you... Was Gary Barnes
that
one
now.
of the was Gary Barnes one of the referees for Mr. Barilaro?
Chair, the question
I'll
has
take
been
it on
taken
notice, and because
It's fine.
partly it's confidential recruitment information, but secondly I don't know it.
Well,
so
there's no privilege in relation to that in this hearing.
let me know when you'd like some answers to your other questions.
Well, Secretary Brown, the first question we'd like an answer, well, the question we'd like an answer to right now was very clear here. Did Secretary Gary Barnes, or is he still a secretary?
Yes, yes.
Secretary Gary Barnes express a reference check? Because that would have, if that was brought to your attention, perhaps it may have occurred to you that there was a conflict of interest in Mr. Barnes providing such a reference. So what we're asking here is, did Secretary Barnes provide a reference for John Barilaro for this job?
I'm just going to point out, Chair, I'll take
what?
a point of order to that.
On what?
Oh,
Well, I've got the right to
Mr.
do
Fang,
this.
what's your
and-
point of order? Very quickly. Don't take up the time. Just what's your point of order?
Chair, the Parliamentary Evidence Act is that only lawful questions can be asked. Now, in relation to questions that have privilege or confidential information,
We're protected by privilege here, Wes.
no, but you're unable to force force an answer. Now, the answer is taken. The witness has taken the question on notice, and that is the appropriate way for this to be handled.
Thank you. Yes, I will remind members that witnesses are able to take questions on notice, but proceed with your questions.
Sorry, the question that Mrs. Hussos asked was, did Secretary Barnes provide a reference to former Deputy Premier Barilaro for this job?
As I didn't conduct the reference checks myself, I'll have to take it on notice.
Sorry,
You
just
go, you
Ms.
go.
Secretary Brown, you signed this contract 9 days ago.
Yes.
Presumably you would have asked before you signed the contract as an employer, as any employer would do for any job, was there any issues with the references? Did you ask that question?
Chair.
Point of order. Point of order.
Sorry, I'm
Another
asking...
The point of order is that the witness has already indicated that this is confidential recruiting information and that she's taking the question on notice.
Mr.
And you've
Mookie
pressed a number of
reframed
times
the
on this.
question,
Chair,
Mr. Fang.
It's a different question.
Mr. Mookie reframed the question, and I believe Ms. Brown is very capable of responding whichever way she wishes to the question Mr. Mookie just asked her.
So, Secretary, for the contract you signed 9 days ago, did you make any inquiries with your staff or anyone else as to whether there were any issues that arose from the reference checks?
I didn't ask the question, no.
What inquiries did you make before signing the contract?
Well, I was on the panel. I undertook the interviews. The steps that then follow are 360-degree reference checks, subsequent due diligence, ASIC checks, insolvency checks, police checks, occupational personality questionnaire. That all occurs, and then the panel signs its report.
And the reference report.
And the reference, yeah,
Well,
that's
telling us
360
you can't
degree.
tell us.
that's
She's
the
talking
360
But
degree.
you can't tell us
I
who gave
didn't
you the
Just
undertake
order.
it.
Secretary.
Just to let you know, every time everybody speaks over each other, hands I can't hear a thing, so that's not great for anybody, Mr. Mookie.
Secretary, I appreciate you didn't do the reference check. To be fair to you, we're not asking whether you did the reference check. But the reference check is provided to the recruitment panel in first instance
It
and
is.
then thereafter.
Yes.
And I can only presume that as a member of the recruitment panel, you read the material that was in front of you, correct?
Yes, in late March.
Yes, and therefore you would have recall of the report, the reference report that was provided by NGS Global, correct?
Yes, in late March.
Yes, and presumably as you finalised the decision, the recruitment panel, as you just said, signed off on the final report in, I think you said 16 June, correct?
That's when we signed the report because there was a logistical reason
Yep.
because Katharina was
Sure.
not available.
But you did sign on the 16th of June, did you not?
Yes, but I read the reference checks at the end of March.
Sure, and I accept that. So now having established that you read the reference checks, Did Secretary Barnes provide a reference?
I'll take it on notice.
Ms Brown, can you understand why, given this is supposed to be an independent process, and we're assured it is, that the constant meetings with ministers, these informal approvals, the sense checks that you've referred to, the cancellation of the process, all this is leading to questions about exactly how independent this process is?
I do understand. The sense check with ministers was actually more with respect to the second rank candidate because they had no experience with government, and I was just a little bit worried about their ability to represent New South Wales on that basis.
You've been very specific about when John Barilaro applied to this role, but when did you first become aware that John Barilaro might be interested in applying for one of these commissioner roles?
So Minister Ayres mentioned casually that Mr Barilaro might apply.
When did that occur?
Well, the position was advertised on the 17th of December, and he applied on the 19th of January, sometime in that time, but I mean, we were all off on Christmas and New Year, so...
And earlier than that, did the Deputy Premier's office or the Deputy Premier ever raise the possibility that John Barilaro might have an interest in this role?
The current Deputy Premier?
That John Barilaro... Well,
do you mean, did Mr Barilaro contact me?
Did either Mr Barilaro's office or Mr Ayres' office, or those ministers, prior to that time, ever raise the fact that he may have an interest in the role?
No, they did not.
When did you first become aware that Deputy Premier John Barilaro might resign from office?
On the day he resigned.
Yep. And when you refer to the events of the 27th of September to the 1st of October, when you were briefed about that instruction to make these ministerial appointments, just for context, that Friday the 1st of October was the date on which Gladys Berejiklian resigned. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, and the New South Wales Trade Statement was launched.
When you say that this was a...
Peter remembers resignation.
When you say this was a cabinet decision, a government decision,
yes,
to change this to ministerial appointments, you accept that there's been significant reporting that in fact John Barilaro had strong views, put strong views in that cabinet meeting as part of that government decision. You've seen that reporting?
It's an issue for cabinet, so I don't know.
Yep, thank you.
But I've seen the reporting.
And can you tell us why you believe the Premier, particularly in his role as a former Treasurer, says that he has no recollection of being asked for approval for these roles, given that the paperwork shows clearly there's a Treasury brief which is signed by the former Treasurer, brief TA 21-1395, which seeks his approval.
Do you have a copy
Point of order, I don't think that the Secretary could be asked to answer on behalf of the Premier and why the Premier thinks something.
I've heard the point of order, but I think Mr Graham...
Given Ms Brown's answer, I'm happy for...
Yeah.
I'm happy with that answer.
If it's the brief you're referring to, it was a noting brief with respect to the first candidate. Is that... So I can't see the brief because...
Yes, I'm comfortable with your
answer.
There
was no approval.
Ms Brown, I just wanted to come back to when you were advised by Mr Ayres that Mr Barilaro would be applying. Can you give us any more clarity? Was it around Christmas? Was it...
I suspect it was in January when we were back for Christmas, and he mentioned it as a passing comment only.
Do you remember where that conversation occurred?
No, I would normally have my Secretary Minister one-to-one in his office.
Okay, and it was in the course of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to come back to the question of why you decided to restart the process. I mean, you'd gone through a pretty extensive recruitment process. You had collated this list. You felt you had a candidate. Now, subsequently, you thought that that person wasn't the right person for the role. Why didn't you just go to the number 2 candidate? Why didn't you just go to Minister Ayres and say, we've gone through this process, the number 2 candidate, here they are?
Given months had passed, my preference as hiring manager was to relaunch the process and see who applied, and indeed one candidate from the first process did apply again.
Was that the number 2 candidate?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and did you ever go back to that person before commencing the process, before starting the recruitment process again and saying, are you interested?
No, because I wasn't entirely sure and I really felt more confident doing another search.
Hang on, so can I just pick that up? The runner-up from the first process was prepared to reapply, did reapply for the second process, is that correct?
That's correct.
So at that point, the passage of time had did not create any disruption in that second candidate's mind, clearly, because they applied for it again. And at that point, you still concluded that rather than going to the runner-up, we would spend a lot more money repeating the exact same process, correct?
I'm happy to provide the costs, but given the amount that given the importance of these roles to New South Wales economy in terms of foreign direct investment and export potential, I really wanted to check the market again. I wasn't entirely comfortable.
Well, the runner-up candidate who has been identified in the public domain has a very impressive CV, and on a
the runner-up candidate for the first process. Sorry,
runner-up for the first process. Yes, you're correct. Sorry, who then reapplied for the second has a really impressive CV. He's a non-executive director of Meat and Livestock Australia. He's worked in commercialisation, technology, innovation and growth, including throughout the world. He's a director of 5-6 companies that are listed here on his own CV, which is public. He's chairs companies before. He's been a marketing director. He's been a national sales manager for a major corporation. He's been an associate of McKinsey. How is it possible on a side-by-side comparison you conclude that person isn't right for the job, but John Barilaro is?
Luckily we have interview processes.
Again, so it was a merit-based comparative recruitment process with a 5-member panel.
He has an education from MBA Wharton, the Wharton School, MBA Marketing and Finance.
But that's not the criteria,
But he hasn't
Mr.
got an
Miss
MBA
Brown,
from
Miss
the
Brown,
National
I'm asking
Trust.
you to
Yeah.
explain, right? Because it appears to us here that we have an MBA graduate from Wharton who's a member of the AIOD, holds a degree in economics and law, experience working around the world, worked for McKinsey, Optus, Communications, many other startups,
Mr. Barilaro
doesn't get the role, but John Barilaro does. Now, I'm accepting you at your word when you say this is a merit-based decision.
Yep.
Can you please explain to me the merit of John Barilaro over a candidate like this?
In terms of why Mr. Barilaro was first ranked candidate, there are a couple of factors. One is knowledge of New South Wales industry strengths and capabilities, and having a strong network within government, industry and business, and being able to use that network, and also understanding as to what the potential is in terms of New South Wales competitive advantages and how we can leverage them into the US. Mr. Barilaro showed superior knowledge of that, and we as the panel had more confidence that he would be able to get outcomes in that market.
So he's been the chief executive of an industry group, a peak industry group for those in the technology sector. The membership of his industry sector includes Google, Apple, Microsoft, Telstra and Optus. Now, I accept Minister Barilaro has experience with Google. I'm not sure it's positive. But are you seriously telling me?
Well, it is.
Are you seriously telling me that John Barilaro has more international experience than this particular candidate? Are you seriously suggesting that on a merit-based level, he has more ability to do the job than a person who has dealt with these companies throughout his entire career? That's your view evidence to us.
There are a number of criteria against which Mr. Barilaro was assessed against other candidates, and once all of those were weighed up, the panel of 5 people concluded that he was the first ranked candidate.
And the first criteria lists postgraduate qualifications?
No, it's a suitability assessment criteria.
Can you give the committee
It's not about
the
whether you have a degree.
weightings of each criteria? I assume that they're in the.
I think
during
you'll
that
be
process.
provided with this as per the order that we're compiling as we speak.
We'll just jump in with a few cross-bench questions. I've just got one or maybe two before I hand over to Mr. Borzak. I just wanted to go back just to make sure of your response to this. The internal email that has been mentioned in the media dated the 6th of April 2021, which talks about that structured approval process. So that's the one that says that if endorsed by all 3, that's the Treasurer, the Deputy Premier and the Premier, a cabinet appointment form is prepared and added as a cabinet agenda item. Once endorsed by cabinet, a contract can then be offered to the candidate for negotiation. Then I think in a subsequent email chain, you expressed that there was some erroneous, you used the word erroneous. Could you just explain again why the 6th of April, why that was just so clearly laid out, that structured approval protocol, and why that wasn't followed?
Yep, great question. So 6th of April 2021, Investment New South Wales had only been established for a week. That email came from someone who is not particularly senior in our HR team, who was following indeed the way that the approvals process was relayed to her when she was in New South Wales Treasury. So that is how we proceeded. But as things unfolded, something about that approval process didn't seem right to me, because it's a GSE Act appointment and it's not usual to send them to Cabinet.
Sorry
so
to interrupt.
I checked it.
So just to be clear though, you said that was a kind of junior, somebody within HR that was relatively junior that wrote that email. But fair enough, she puts that in an email. But then everybody else that is senior within the departments follows it by the letter for many months. So to blame blame whoever it was within HR who put that together, it certainly sounded like it wasn't there coming from a thought bubble in their head. They had been given something to compile the email with which you and others followed for many months.
And I apologise to that person to make it sound like they didn't know what they were doing. They were following the process that was set up by New South Wales Treasury when this Global New South Wales network was first envisaged. Again, as you say, we followed the process for a good few months. That's why the Agent General...
When exactly again?
11th of August, when I sought advice, or clarification rather, from the General Counsel of Department of Premier and Cabinet, because she's very familiar with these legislative and cabinet matters.
Why did you seek advice? What was behind?
So the Agent General and Senior Trade Investment Commissioner for North Asia had already gone through. Then we were preparing the paperwork for the next three: ASEAN, India and the Middle East, and the Americas. And I actually kind of caught myself and said, I don't think this is quite right that they're going to Cabinet, but let me check with somebody who knows a lot more than I do. I did that, and it was confirmed that indeed the previous appointments went to Cabinet in error.
And you did that off your own back in conversations with nobody, that 11th of August decision when you sought advice?
I would have brought my team into the loop, Chief of Staff, the Executive Director who's in charge of the global rollout, perhaps General Counsel of Investment. But I used to work in Premier and Cabinet, so the General Counsel there's a bit of a go-to.
Anybody else outside of your team? Anybody?
No, certainly not. No.
No?
No.
So, Mr. Borzak.
Ms Brown, given Mr Barilaro's well-published, or publicised, I should say, mental health situation following the Friendly Geordies incident, did you consider or have any concerns about his suitability for the role, based on what was publicly revealed by him himself and what was in the newspapers?
Mental health struggles are not a criteria to be given or not given a job.
So the psychological testing that was done in relation to this role didn't reveal any matters of concern?
Psychometric testing was satisfactory.
Was satisfactory.
Or else Katharina Lowe, the Independent Public Service Commissioner, would never have approved.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
Nice
Okay.
try to blow.
I just wanted to turn to the essential requirements on the NGS Global for the candidates for the role. The first one says tertiary qualifications, including postgraduate qualifications in international relations and trade, economics, public policy administration, business management, or in a related discipline, or demonstrated equivalent professional experience and training. So it is.
Essential requirement.
It's an essential requirement for the role is a postgraduate qualification, and yet, as the extensive resume that was read out by my colleague earlier, you judged John Barilaro to be superior to that. Can you just explain that to the committee?
Look, I think you'll find that there are a number of Band 3s and 4s across government who do not have an undergraduate or postgraduate degree. And so when someone has the right experience, aptitude, attitude, skills, capabilities, we would never then veto the appointment because of what degree they do or don't have.
Okay, but on your criteria list, the essential weighting was for a postgraduate criteria.
That is the way that the role description was constructed, although I don't have it in front of me, you do, so I'm happy to take a look.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you go on and then I've got some more.
Secretary Brown, prior to your appointment of former Deputy Premier Barilaro to this role, did you seek any legal advice about whether or not Minister Barilaro was in compliance or otherwise of the Independent Commission Against Corruption Act?
No, not in addition to not with respect to that act, but there are standard police checks, insolvency checks and ASIC checks that are done. That is it.
Section 10.1 of the Act said that a minister must not improperly use any information acquired in the course of their official functions, including in the course of cabinet deliberations, for the private benefit of themselves or any other person. What steps did you take to ensure that Minister Barilaro didn't use any of the information that was provided to him as Deputy Premier when he lodged his application on the 19th of January?
I had no view that Mr Barilaro had acted improperly in bringing a decision to the government, in bringing a submission to the government to then make a decision on.
Secretary Brown, that wasn't my question. Secretary Brown, my question was, what steps did you take to ascertain whether any of the information that was used by Mr Barilaro in his application did not derive from his service as a Deputy Premier?
Mr Barilaro applied for this job as a private citizen and it's a public service job, so that is the frame with which I...
But you are aware that ministers are actually subject to some restrictions and protocols in relation to post-separation employment. You don't believe that this was an issue, given that he had resigned in October and was applying for this job in December?
Not that I or the Public Service Commissioner was alerted to or discussed.
Secretary
No.
Brown, you formerly worked for the DPC, did you not?
I formerly worked for Premier and Cabinet. Yes, I did.
You're aware that there is a Ministerial Code of Conduct, are you not?
I'm aware, yes.
You're aware that that Ministerial Code of Conduct says that no former minister can obtain a job in relation to any matter for which they had portfolio responsibility within 12 months?
I would need to take advice on that.
Well, you're invited to take advice on that. That is a point that the Premier has himself identified. What steps did you take to ensure that the Minister's application wasn't prohibited by grounds of the Premier's own Ministerial Code of Conduct?
It was for the previous Deputy Premier, then private citizen, to satisfy himself that he had complied with all obligations under his previous and continuing Ministerial Code of Conduct.
I agree with that, Secretary, that the obligation is on Minister Barilaro.
Correct.
But surely, with the Public Service Commissioner and others involved in this process, no one said to you that this minister was directly responsible for these roles. He's now taking these roles. At first instance, at least, that's prohibited by the Ministerial Code of Conduct. No one brought that to your attention.
No one brought that to my attention.
Can I just know, was it brought to the attention in the interview itself with Mr Barilaro?
No, it was not.
Was Mr Barilaro ever asked about whether or not he was complying in the selection panel?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you make any inquiries as to whether Minister Barilaro took the advice of the Parliamentary Ethics Advisor, as he is required to, as to be fair, all members of Parliament are required to do, before they take a job?
I did not inquire with Mr Barilaro as to what steps he'd taken to satisfy himself as to his obligations from when he was previously a minister.
But Secretary Brown, do you accept that given the moment you sign the contract, you're validating the fact that it's an appointment that legally can be made?
A stretch.
Yeah.
Do you wish to take advice on that?
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a offer to take a certain role with Investment New South Wales, between Investment New South Wales and an individual. It is not verifying everything that happened prior to that moment in time in somebody's previous personal and professional capacity. I don't think that's what signing an employment contract entails, but I'm happy to take advice.
Chair, I might just indicate to the witness that she'll be asked at the conclusion of proceedings to whether she can table that contract as flagged earlier. So just for you and your advisors, if that's
a good question.
Yeah.
I've got some notice. I've got some.
We can do that at the end.
Yeah, we'll come to it at the end.
I just have one question. Ms Brown, did you make any conflict of interest declarations in the first round of recruitment?
No, nobody did on the panel.
Sorry, in respect to any of the stick positions?
Do you mean What do you mean? Sorry. In the first round?
I'm asking, in previous recruitment processes, did you make any other declarations of conflicts of interest?
Or any
No.
stick position?
Or any stick position?
No.
Sorry, can I just...
Sorry.
Secretary Brown, at estimates, we talked about this. You and I had a good discussion about the fact that 2 former PwC partners were appointed
We
to
started
this
the
job.
discary. We were timed out.
That's
It was
true.
very
And
end
here
of
we
the-
are again where we can pick it up.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes.
And this is what you said. What I'm interested in is, I asked you, what I'm interested in is that we have a process which came at some expense to recruit these commissioners, and 2 of them happen to be partners at PwC. Miss Brown, do you have a history with the firm? I was a partner. Was that a conflict? Did you know? I believe I can double check this. I think I went to PwC. We talked about that. I was in infrastructure. And then I think you go on to say that you declared it for noting that you were a PwC partner.
No, I wouldn't have declared it for noting. I would have mentioned it in the course of the conversation prior to the candidate entering the room to say, it's a partner of PwC. I didn't work closely with him, but I know of him.
The very specific
And-
exchange we had was, that was not necessarily my question. My question was, did you have a conflict and did you declare one?
No, I did not declare one.
And then you said, I noted and made the panel aware that I was a partner of PwC.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. And Ms. Sousa, I just note that it says postgraduate degree, essential or relevant experience.
Okay,
So that's
Ms.
how we
Brown,
would have got to that.
I want to press this question
relevant experience.
about the conflict of interest. You made in the previous round of recruitment for Sticks, you had indicated that you had a tangential relationship with someone, that you hadn't worked closely with them. Did you make a similar declaration before you interviewed Mr. Barilaro?
No, because I didn't make a declaration the first time. I don't make declarations because I have worked with people in the past. I note in the case of PwC there are over 600 partners.
In case
and
of John Barilaro, he'd been your boss.
I did not make a conflict of interest declaration because there was no personal benefit to be obtained, and he was not my boss. That mischaracterises the relationship between the agency head and a minister to whom they are accountable.
But Ms. Brown, you know that a conflict of interest declaration is much broader than just a personal interest, as you did when you, for noting in the previous interview round, said that I might have known these people in the past.
Well, of course I knew Mr. Barilaro in the past. I was with the Public Service Commissioner who knows the structure of the public service and that he was the Minister for Trade and Industry.
But Ms. Brown, you have just said that you didn't insist on Mr. Barilaro completing his own declarations, but you could have made your own about a conflict of interest
I could have,
declaration.
but there was
Why
no conflict
didn't you?
of interest, so I did not. And Katharina Lowe, who is the Public Service Commissioner, hopefully you'll call her and she can talk to that point.
What's the conflict?
Order.
I don't know.
Mr.
Because
Okay, we're doing
exactly.
so well.
Mr. Secretary Brown, can I take you to page 12 of the tender bundle?
What page did you say?
12.
Okay.
This is correspondence that you send
Yeah.
to your Chief of Staff, in which you say, here you go, thanks so much for preparing. Jim B, which is a reference to Jim Betts, who at that time is the incoming Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet,
No longer.
strongly recommends that the recruitment reports fully signed by each panel member be completed before this brief is sent up to ministers in anticipation of them messing with due process. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Betts, with then Secretary Betts
Yeah.
about signing the selection reports?
I did have a conversation with Secretary Betts about signing the selection report.
And did he warn you that there was a chance that there were ministers would mess with due process?
We had a conversation about the fact that because the other 2 appointments went to Cabinet, there was a lot of confusion, and I was concerned that certain ministers or their officers may feel that they have veto rights over my appointment.
Who were you concerned that would have veto rights over your appointment?
I was concerned that the Deputy Premier's office would
So you were
feel
concerned
they had
that
veto rights.
Deputy Premier's office would have concerned, and then Secretary Betts gave you the advice to make sure that every panel checked it, correct?
Yes, and particularly because the first rank candidate was a current bureaucrat.
Thank you. Can we now turn to page 35 of the bundle? You'll have to start on page 36. This is, and then we'll go to 35. It's an email chain that starts on the bottom of page 36 and then goes up. So we'll have to start on 36. You can see here, right at the bottom of 35, I think one of your executive assistants chases up
Yep.
for the signed panel report that Secretary Betts recommended. And you say right at the bottom here, your executive assistant is informing someone else, your chief of staff, I think,
Yep.
that Amy would like to arrange for the DPO to have a copy of today if possible. See that?
Yes, I do.
Can you go to page 35?
Yep.
Can you go up the page?
Yep.
You see here that this person, who's also now the executive assistant, is emailing now the executive assistant of Secretary Betts.
Yes.
To your EA, is emailing Mr. Betts' EA.
Yes.
It says this: "Hi, just wanted to confirm we might receive an approved signed copy of the panel selection report. We need to include this with our brief to the DPO and across ASAP." You understand DPO to be a reference to the Deputy Premier's office?
That is true.
Why was it so urgent to send it to the Deputy Premier's office?
Now, I wanted to provide briefs, for noting briefs, to the 4 ministers who I referred to before, and I wanted the selection reports to be signed before I did that.
Indeed.
And I'd already verbally offered, well, no, at this point I hadn't verbally offered the candidate, but I wanted to get going on the appointment, and so ASAP was...
So, but you don't mention the other officers in this email. We need to include this with our brief to the DPO and across. It's not DPO and Treasury, DPO and Premiers, DPO and Heirs. It's DPO.
Well, he was the portfolio minister.
But was
so
he asking for this brief urgently?
His office were, yeah.
His office was asking for an urgent brief outlining the selection report for the New York position.
They wanted to know the outcome of the process.
Well, indulgence, Chair. Can I just ask a few more questions?
Just one.
Not-
just
no.
You've had your time. You've had 2 hours.
Finish the line of questioning
Thank you.
you
The
just
only line
did.
of question is, did you then send the report to the Deputy Premier's office?
It was attached to the 4 noting brief that went up on the 11th of August.
So it went up on the 11th of August.
That's right.
The report went to the Deputy Premier's office about the Americas position.
Yes, because it was attached to the briefing.
Okay, thank you very much. That's actually we finish at midday, unless of course the government would
The
like to,
government
with the
does.
permission
The
of the
government does.
witness, with the if the witness is able to the government would like to ask questions for remaining 15 minutes if they have.
yeah,
I think there's a
with the
resolution of the
indulgence
committee.
of the
I note also that
Just-
Ms Brown says she's got some answers that
Yeah.
provide to the...
Okay, questions from the government who'd like
And then
to
we'll come
proceed?
to, I'll start off,
Mr.
thank
Fowler.
you. Just
forget.
for clarification, with respect to the obligations of a minister in seeking future employment, and whether you gave any reference to this, Ministerial Code of Conduct at 24.2 specifically says that the clause does not apply to any offer of post-separation employment by the State of New South Wales or any agency representing the state. Is that something you would have considered perhaps in terms of your discussions with Mr Barilaro?
That's very helpful. I suspect that the Public Service Commissioner is very aware of that provision, as I also would expect that my General Counsel is, and that is why I did not receive any counsel or advice to the contrary.
Thank you very much, Ms Brown. Ms Brown, also turning back to the evidence you gave with respect to there being no suitable applicant at the end of the process on the 1st of October. Now, as I understand it, you outlined in about mid-September you started to make Ms West aware of the potential that there were going to be some changes in terms of how that role was appointed. I think you invited the committee before that potentially you were happy to go into, or maybe not happy, but could go into why you'd come to that view that Ms West was not suitable for the role. I'd just invite you to perhaps outline that to the committee, why you believe that why as of the 1st of October you had come to the view that she was not suitable for the role.
Point of order.
There's a point of order's been taken.
As I recall, what the Secretary said was that she's happy to provide further evidence in camera, which I'm happy to resolve with going in camera to hear the evidence, because it's a good question, and I think perhaps the appropriate thing to do would be to go into
That's
camera.
correct. We have been very careful throughout the last 2 hours. So just remind government members of trying not to name individuals.
Well, I think Ms
actually,
West
and
has
to
been
use
quite
this-
high
to
profile
use
in this
final
inquiry.
15 minutes of a public hearing to outline why an applicant is not suitable. I would suggest we'd go in camera for that.
Well, I think that it's fundamental when it comes to the actual nature of this inquiry that there was a candidate who was deemed to not be suitable for a certain reason by the 1st of October.
Just to the clear point of order, I'm not challenging the right of the government to ask the question. The government has a right to ask the question. And there's been previous practice in the Legislative Council where we are giving sensitive information about a person. We go in camera and the committee can make a decision later as to whether we publish the transcript. And so my view is if the government wishes to continue to move down this path, because it's a valid question,
Yes.
the appropriate way for us to deal with it would be in camera with the committee making a decision later
If
about
that
whether
was
we
the wish
publish.
of the witness, yeah.
Yeah.
If that was the wish of the witness, and if the opposition members wanted to move that way, then that's what we do. Does the witness wish to proceed in that manner in terms of
Other than to say
discussing?
the relationship deteriorated, specific details of that are probably best for in camera.
Yeah,
we
okay.
will
So
happily
if that's
move.
the
Okay.
way,
Well,
all
we-
right,
we
let's
can move into camera,
proceed. Let's
No,
Well, why don't
Well, look,
we
why don't
at
we
a
come back
future
to this
time?
line of,
Yeah.
if I can, an indulgence, pass to my colleague, Mr. Fang.
Okay.
And if we can return to this in an in-camera hearing.
Yes, that's right. Yes, exactly.
I just wanted to.
Yep.
Yeah, we can do it a different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
think
order,
that-
order.
Chair.
So what we're going to do, yes, so any other questions from the government that
Yes.
don't require us to go in camera, then if time permits, we will go in camera to respond, to go down that line of questioning by Mr. Farlow. So Mr. Fang.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I imagine you've been involved in a number of recruitment processes, not just this one for the sticks. Would that be fair?
Very many.
Very many. Is it fair to say that when you're recruiting for a role, sometimes the best candidate on paper isn't necessarily the best candidate for the role, given a number of issues, their interpersonal skills, the way that they interact, the way they relate, communicate? Is that fair?
Relatively often.
So, would it be reasonable to suggest that trying to make a decision for a high-profile role, such as a trade commissioner, to the Americas or any other of those roles, to have gone purely off academic qualifications would have been misguided?
That's the point of a panel interview process, yes.
Okay. If one of the candidates was to have a broken leg, would that preclude them from running for the role?
Certainly not.
So, given that a broken leg is effectively a medical condition, as is, say, another issue like a mental health challenge that you may have at some point in your life, that wouldn't preclude you from a role if you're able to pass the aptitude testing. Is that correct?
Our diversity and inclusion targets in the public service have targets specifically around people with a disability.
Right. So, and it would have been discriminatory to exclude somebody
On the
from-
basis of mental health challenges?
Yes.
Absolutely, it would.
Thank you. Can I confirm that the process has been completely independent of government, and that in the second round, the candidate with the highest criteria across all selection, I'll say the selection criteria, was the person that was offered the job?
Not necessarily across each individual criteria, but across all criteria when taken together.
Thank you. I think that will pretty much conclude the question.
So
Okay.
we'll go into camera. I just want to ask one further question to Ms. Brown. So when Ms. West applied for the job, she was working within Trade and Investment New South Wales at the time, is that correct?
She was within Investment New South Wales as Deputy Secretary
Yep.
of Trade and International.
What conflicts of interest protections were put in place as that was an internal applicant? Was there a process there?
So she was not permitted to be involved in any of the recruitments of Senior Trade and Investment Commissioners that were happening in parallel, so that she didn't have visibility of what questions we were asking, or indeed the candidates who'd applied for a number of, because some people applied for more than one stick position.
Okay.
All right.
Chair,
Okay.
I
Move
think
into
the
in-camera
witness
now.
might have had some additional
Oh,
answers
yes.
that she
Yes.
was able to provide, so perhaps we might deal with those first.
So with respect to Mr. Barilaro's cost of living allowance that's been included in his contract, so while the information of contracts is private and confidential, I can confirm the cost is less than $16,000.
There goes that other question.
I need to correct the...
Difference?
Thank you. Please proceed. Yep.
I wish I'd known that when I said marginal, because that is an accurate description. 9th of June is actually when he signed his contract. I said it commenced on the 20th of June, which is true, but he signed it on the 9th.
Thank you.
And then the fit-out cost for our New York office, it was $905,000
US or Australian?
AUD.
Thank you. And can I just ask about that issue about tabling the contract of John Barilaro? I know it'll be produced as part of the call for papers,
That's right.
but you've been requested to table it today at the hearing. Is that possible?
Advice is still being obtained, and I'm unable to table it today, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right. So we will now move in camera. So if we could please have members of the media and members in the public gallery to leave the room as quickly as you are able to. Thank you very much. And we're going to have a in-camera committee meeting.